Dearest fantasy readers, welcome to the Dear Fantasy Reader podcast, where two best friends, Hannah and Karen, travel through the pages of our favorite romantasy novels. Join us as we take flight into the world of the Empyrean series, diving deep into the chapters, exploring characters, scenes, theories, foreshadowing, and more, taking what we've learned from the second book, Iron Flame, to reread and re-experience the first.
With that content warning and spoiler alert, we will be covering anything and everything Empyrean series to this date and any content Rebecca Yarros has given us. So if you haven't read both already, save this podcast, go do that, and we'll be here waiting when you are done. Also, due to the nature of these books, this podcast is rated R in content and in language.
As Rebecca Yarros says, readers who may be sensitive to these elements, please take note and prepare to enter Basgiath War College. It gives me chills every time. First, some exciting things to share. We now have a Discord group chat where we can continue the conversation, theories, and fun. You can find the link to join in the show notes. Also, important reminder, this is the last week to enter the giveaway that we have over on our TikTok and Instagram for a Taylor Swift folklore cardigan, a Tortured Poets Taylor Swift signed CD, and copies of both Fourth Wing and Iron Flame provided by a Taylor Swift-inspired romance-only bookstore called The New Romantics. The giveaway will close in just a few days on August 31st, so run on over there. You do not want to miss out. If you are enjoying our podcast so far, please leave us a review wherever you are listening. Reviews go so far in helping us get the word out. Thank you in advance. Now, time for a quick refresh of chapters 10 through 12 of Fourth Wing from our personal scribe informant, Karen.
We are introduced to the Gauntlet, a terrifying obstacle course designed to prepare the cadets for the skills they need to mount and ride a dragon, including balance, strength, and stamina before they are ready for threshing. The Gauntlet takes the life of the most prepared cadet, Orly, deeply affecting Violet, who vows to personally handle Orly's belongings. After burning Orly's things in a Devarian tribute to Malik, Violet finds Xaden, Garrick, and Bodhi returning from a late-night flight. Xaden quickly notices Violet's presence in the shadows and dismisses both Garrick and Bodhi so they can speak privately. Violet confides in Xaden that hope is the worst thing about Basgiath, and that she is too short to make it across the final obstacle in the Gauntlet. Xaden gives her the golden advice that the right way to overcome this obstacle is not the only way. Gauntlet and presentation day arrives, and Dane, in true Dane fashion, continues his sulking, trying every way he can to stop Violet from risking her life to become a writer. He was almost successful, but Violet has made up her mind. She would rather die trying than run away and never know if she could have made it. Finally, Violet begins the Gauntlet challenge, taking Xaden's advice. She gets creative, using her dagger to gain the extra leverage she needs to complete the final obstacle. Wing leader Amber Mavis, notorious for following the Codex, is quick to claim that this was cheating. Violet, knowing the Codex better than anyone, recites a passage that establishes her dagger as part of her person since she carried it across the parapet. This infuriates Amber, but impresses the only wing leader we care about around here, Xaden Ryerson. Now it's time for presentation, where all of the cadets parade in a straight line in front of the waiting dragons who are willing to bond this year. Hoping to avoid getting roasted alive, Violet and her squad mates make conversation as they walk. At the end of the line, they notice a small, golden feather tail who is completely insignificant to our story. As the cadets head back to the starting line, indecisive prior is killed by one of the dragons who deems him unworthy. Suddenly, 2 green dragons take an interest in Violet, sniffing her as she walks by. She realizes they are drawn in by the scent of her dragon scale armor, recognizing they were made from Mira's dragon Time. Time?
Yeah. Great job.
Luca is torched by a dragon shortly after insulting Violet. Not that any of us really minded that. And the rest of Fourth Wing second squad are officially ready for threshing.
Woo! So much actually happens, like action-wise, in these 3 chapters. So, drum roll, cadets, as we are officially crossing the gauntlet into our discussion and analysis section. So here we are walking through the major plot points and moments in the stretch of chapters, starting with Gauntlet Practice. Woo! Starting off strong with some bonus content from Rebecca Yarros from my personal Rebecca Yarros Interviews archives. She recently said at the Emerald City Comic-Con 2024 that, quote, "The gauntlet was not in my original synopsis. I wrote an 8-page synopsis, and of course, when I plot, I'm like the weirdest plotter. I'm like a conspiracy theorist. So I have the plot line and the arc in each chapter, and then I have color-coded Post-its to tell me where the action is, where the romance is, where the secrets are revealed, when the Easter eggs are laid." I love this about her. "So I can stand back from this 4x6 plot board and tell you which void a color is in this area. But I hadn't done that quite with Fourth Wing, and as I was writing it really fast, I had the plot lined up. I didn't realize I was missing action. So the gauntlet wasn't going to be there. And then I was like, yes, they have to have some way to prove to the dragons that they cannot just balance on their spine, but they can get up those high legs and they can do the combat on their backs, and that they can handle these rolling, dipping maneuvers. So that was never going to be there. It got added as I was writing, which never happens." End quote. Whoa, if she didn't just info dump on us. But what?
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad that she added it in. It seems very necessary that they have some sort of test that will prove to the dragons that they can handle this.
Yeah, that makes sense. At first, when I read this, I was like, well, this gives me anxiety, so we don't have to keep it. But you're right. It was a necessity to have as a layer to them being badass as writers. If they wouldn't have had to go through this and prove that they could do all XYZ things. Now, did they have to die in the process of trying to practice? No. But
no.
Anyways, Karen, I have to know, what did you picture in your mind for the gauntlet when you were reading it?
Not gonna lie, I straight up envisioned American Ninja Warrior.
Same.
But
wait, no, same.
I did envision it a little less colorful than that, because American Ninja Warrior is bright reds and stuff like that. I love that this was a collective thought between us.
I don't know if it's just my limited imagination, but as she was explaining it in the chapter, it was going going over my head. I was like, I can't picture any of this. So I was picturing the big blobs that they try and walk on that they bounce off of. To me, that is how Orly died. She fell off of one of those.
Oh no.
That's what I pictured. Anyways, I've actually come across since then some really cool TikToks of the Gauntlet fan art that are so far from what I had pictured in my head, but are so much more accurate. And we'll link those down in the show notes, I believe. Karen, you found one as well that you sent me. So we'll add both of those in there if you'd like to see what more creative people are picturing in their heads.
Oh my goodness. One is really cool because the TikTok that Hannah found is a video, like she said, going through it. I found more of a 2D drawn version of it, which is also pretty cool.
Still so much closer to our Ninja Warrior stuff. Now,
her Ninja Warrior.
I know we joke and we say Ninja Warrior, but Violet describes this thing as so terrifying that she actually considers for the first time taking Dane's offer to run off to the Scribe Quadrant. And I feel up until then, she's really not backed down. in a place of like fear, but this was enough to push her
Mhm.
too close to the edge on that.
And it's totally understandable because if
Yeah.
you fall, you die. That is an intense course.
Exactly. And I want to actually talk about the irony in Orally dying on the gauntlet. When she was the most prepared out of any of the cadets, her dad was a retired rider and used to set up obstacle courses for her to practice on as she was growing up. This shows just how much it's all up to chance. And again, how the brutality of the rider's quadrant cannot solely be about testing skill. Because if that were the case, she would be the number one person to succeed.
Yeah, it was super shocking that she, out of everyone, was the one to die. She had so much confidence going in and was like actually excited for it. And she just happened to get distracted by the dragon flying overhead. And as we know, if you hesitate for even a split second on this course, it can cost you your life.
Even the fact that her dad was a retired rider is significant because
Mhm.
that's pretty rare. That stood out to me on this reread. From what we're told, riders only usually live a few years, but this is explained as a result of Orly's dad being stationed at the Croveland border in the southern wing. Orly even jokes about this, saying, quote, pretty much desk duty for all of the action that they see near the Croveland border. And this stood out to me for another reason, though. That is one of the places that we know Violet and Dane grew up when their parents were stationed there. Remember in chapter 4, when Dane Bird calls Violet, she thinks he's been using that signal since we were kids living near the Croveland border, while our parents were stationed there with the Southern Wing. Now, this is how Dane became the expert of all of them in Crovelish. But something else feels significant here. Partly, why was a general stationed somewhere where they have no action so many years ago?
That is a great question. And maybe they weren't as high in rank at that point in time, back whenever they were stationed there. Or there's several generals and they rotate where they are deployed. So could be that they needed a general there and they were the ones to go.
I think for sure that's part of it. I just wonder, there's clearly a connection since she's referencing Croveland and Southern Wing here directly. But
Mhm.
it also stood out to me so much that I looked up the other mentions of Southern Wing, and I found two. First, Dane's dad, General Ichos, mentions it in his conversation with Violet when she and Xaden run into him and General Sorrengail in the stairwell later in the book. He tells her, quote, Mira asked about you while we were touring the Southern Wing last month. So we know that Mira is stationed there, which is interesting considering her signet and how they would likely strategically place her where they felt the wards would most need support. But again, we were just told that they never see action there. Second, I then found that it was mentioned in the letter that Violet finds in her mother's office when they raided it for the last squad battle challenge, which reads, General Sorrengail, the raids around Athben have spread the wing too thin. Being posted beyond the safety of the wards comes with considerable hazards, and though I am loath to request reinforcements, I must. If we do not reinforce the post, we may be forced to abandon it, which we know comes into play when Violet visits Athben. We are protecting Navarian citizens with life, limb, and wing, but I cannot adequately relay how dire the situation is here. I know you receive the dailies from our scribe attachment, but I would be remiss in my duties as executive officer of the Southern Wing if I did not write to you personally. Please find us reinforcements. Sincerely, Major Callista Nima. So this is clarification that Athben is near the southern border, which borders the Croveland province, and that is where the Southern Wing is. So the southern border is where we start hearing about more frequent attacks in Battle Brief. And I think that Orly's dad and her joke here was setting up to show that these attacks are abnormal, again, pointing to both the rise in venom or the Griffin Flyers getting more desperate to steal alloy to protect themselves and therefore are attacking more frequently, and together are all setting up for Violet to be sent to Athben, where the Venom attack.
Oof. That makes so much sense, and especially having more attacks in the recent years and not when Orly's dad was there or not when General Sorrengail and Atos were there.
Yeah, I didn't understand it my first read. This took me a lot of thinking through, and so I really wanted to try and outline it as best as I can. This is how I understand it right now, but we'll keep an eye out for any other connections to this. Anyway, back to gauntlet practice. Riddick losing his temper on Tynan. As much as I love Riddick's comedic relief and Tim and just Riddick, I also appreciate seeing the more serious side of him standing up for Violet.
Yes, me too. I love that even though he is mostly in this silly, goofy role, he is so protective of his friends. And I actually love that about the entire group that Violet befriends at Basgiath.
Same, because one of my favorite things to read about is Chosen Family. We've talked about this before, because that is who I consider my true family is Chosen. And so seeing this written out and the development, even in this set of chapters, is nothing beats it.
I love it.
And you know what? I will also say, even though Tynan, who's one of my very least favorite characters of overall, has been a complete ass toward Violet, she still encourages and supports him when he's struggling to get across the gauntlet.
I love this about Violet. She's so supportive of her squad. He is a part of her squad. She will cheer for him and support him in this moment.
Yeah, and you've said it before that one of the things we really love about Violet is that she gives people grace and humanity even when they may not deserve it. And this is such a great example of that.
Yeah.
Now, Sawyer perfected the gauntlet on his first try. This is his second year trying. And Luca points out that he was still passed over by all of the dragons at Threshing. So again, there is this gap in how these obstacles are rationalized and what the dragons are actually looking for.
Right. I don't actually think the humans know what the dragons are looking for. In our chapter 5 through 8 episode, we talked about Violet's conversation with Professor Kaori, where he says, they choose for reasons they don't see fit to share with us. It's important for the cadets to be able to do the obstacles on the gauntlet, but I don't necessarily believe that's what the dragons are looking for.
Oh, 1000%. And I really enjoy these moments where we aren't just told this, but we are shown it. And this is one of those.
Yeah.
Violet starts reciting some super significant info to calm herself down in true Violet fashion. That is filled with foreshadowing. She explains that we don't know much about Feathertails aside from the fact that they reportedly abhor violence and are not suitable for bonding, which we know is actually because they are baby dragons.
I love the mention of they abhor violence.
Yeah,
Violet. I definitely missed the mention of Feathertails in my first read, but caught it on this second read and was like, oh my gosh, an Easter egg. Because it seems insignificant in your first read in the moment, but it's actually so important.
Well, she drops so many dragon details in this way throughout that you just kind of chalk it all up to being as significant as anything else. But boy, was it setting up right here. Now, Rebecca Yarros did something unique here where she pointed out that the researcher, we'll come back to that, couldn't be sure because no Feathertail had ever left the Vale in their lifetime. Is this researcher her dad? But if it was her dad, that would mean that she was more familiar with his research on Feathertails than she has let on to us. But that would mean another researcher was studying feathertails specifically outside of Violet's dad.
Huh.
I don't know, it just stood out to me.
What do you think it's her dad?
I don't know. I just can't imagine that it wouldn't be mentioned that there was a second researcher on feathertails.
Right. That's what leads me to believe.
Yeah.
It is her dad. Ooh, we'll see.
Yeah. I don't know. We also get some orange tail info that is full of foreshadowing. Violet says that orange dragons, coming in various shades of apricot to carrot, are the most unpredictable of dragon kind and therefore always a risk. This has got to be foreshadowing Bade, an orange dragon, bonding to Jack and ultimately deciding to stay bonded to him after he turned venom.
Oof. On your first read, did you guess that Jack was going to bond in orange because of this description?
I was hopeful that Jack wouldn't bond at all. So, no, I didn't really think much about matching people to the dragons that early on. In retrospect, it stood out to me and I was like, oh, well, that fucking makes sense. But no, I have this thing where sometimes world building information can get too much to think through without other context. Some of the dragon info kind of was like, okay, I'll come back to this when I have points of reference for these details. So,
yeah.
Meanwhile, on this gauntlet, Arlie's having a blast over here. She says, this is the best, right before she falls to her death. Not due to a lack of skill, but because she was startled by a dragon flying overhead. This one hits Violet hard. And for all of the reasons that we love her, Violet makes sure that her belongings are treated as though they belonged to someone. She's treating her humanely, rather than letting the school burn her things as just another dead cadet.
And you said it. This is one of the reasons we love Violet. She's got such an empathetic heart. She wasn't even very close to Orly, but decided to be the one to take her things to the burn pit. And I also think it hits really hard for Violet because she was the first person to die from their squad.
That's true. I think especially when we see her at death roll and how much it affected her. Oh boy, is she in for it. Anyways, right after this, we find that Xaden, Garrick, and Bodhi just flew into the courtyard on their dragons. And Violet questions, from where? Now, in Xaden's Chapter 9 POV, he thinks to himself, quote, she takes a fighting stance and I forget the members of second squad surrounding the mat. Forget the mission I'm due to fly this weekend, focusing solely on her. End quote. So he's vague about this mission, but based on Bodhi saying there has to be something more we can do when they're walking on the courtyard after their mission, we can infer that this is a mission they were on to smuggle alloy daggers out to the Griffin flyers.
Ooh, yeah, it has to be something along those lines because he says similar sentiments about the Griffin flyers later.
Yeah. Well, and we've also talked about before, like, when do they sneak off to do these missions? Like, when do they have time? And so I suppose they had time. I don't know if it was because everyone was distracted by presentation day or like, I don't know how they fit all of this in, but here's an example of a mission.
Right.
Interestingly, Xaden seems to sense Violet, who is eavesdropping in the shadows, with his intensic signet before he senses her with his shadows, even though she's described as sitting back into the wall of darkness before she felt her scalp prickle. But the moment she feels the prickle is when Xaden tenses and knows that she's there. So this kind of threw me for a loop because what does this say about his shadow limitations? Because that was a whole conversation between Bodhi and Garrick after she entered the shadows, before he sensed her intentions and tensed up like he didn't know she was there.
Could he have realized that it was Violet and then let her into the shadows? I just don't think that his shadows are extremely limiting.
I didn't think so either, but based on the way that Rebecca wrote it, she intentionally says she slipped into the darkness.
Right.
But when he notices she's there, he stops. He tenses up and tells Bodhi and Garrick immediately to go away. And it's not like she was thinking like any intentions there that could be like the concerning thing that made him tense. I have no doubt that right there is where he found out. Can he use signets at the same time? Maybe he was already looking, like surveying for people's intentions around and then caught hers in his like radar. I don't know. And I honestly, until this very moment, hadn't considered that maybe he can't use both signets at the same time.
I didn't think that his shadows were very limiting because in chapter 32, Xaden is sitting on the parapet and he tells Violet, "I wield shadows violence. I'm just as safe out here as I am in the courtyard." If his shadows can keep him from falling to his death on the parapet, it makes me just feel like there can't be all these limitations with it.
Well, I think in that situation, we know his shadows can be moved and manipulated, but we don't know like the extent that he can hear things with his shadows or like feel things. But I've always assumed, especially, I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I've read fanfic of Xaden's point of view where the shadows hear a lot. So I've kind of made some assumptions in this.
Yeah.
But I think also no matter what he says to Violet about his shadows in Fourth Wing, we have to take a little bit of a grain of salt because he does to some extent use it to cover up his abilities with his intrinsic signet.
That's so true.
But then it just leads you to believe like there's got to be some limitations here that this specific scene, the specific scalp prickle implies that he was actively using his intrinsic signet instead of his shadows, and not using his shadows cost him a whole 3 sentences between the boys before he noticed. So I don't know. If listeners, if you have any thoughts on this, we'd love to tease it out with you because I'm really curious. And I think we'll get more context in future books about that for sure, especially if he can't use but one of them at a time. And then that would lead to the question, again, all signets are different, but can Violet use 2 at the same time?
Yeah.
Or, oh, wait, I just had a thought. Violet has 2 dragons whose power she's channeling from, right? So she could probably use those. Xaden's is all from the same dragon. So when he has 2 signets channeling from the same dragon source, is that like half of the power of Sigale? He could probably burn out. He probably has X amount of power, and no matter like uses a chunk of it for intrinsic, a chunk for shadows, like is closer to burnout. Whereas Violet would have literally double, like 100% for each of her signets. Okay. That is a tangent I am glad we went on because, whoa. Yeah. All right. This is why I wanted to have this podcast, because I love those moments where we just like get to talk it out and bounce things off of each other. And then bam, here's an epiphany.
We're like, what?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to think a little bit more on that one too. Okay. This could be a stretch, but I wonder if the scalp prickles are Xaden entering her mind to read intentions. And after the first prickle, where he's already entered, he's already read it for that like X amount of time, he can continue to read them from that moment without another scalp prickle.
It's possible.
Just throwing out these brain teasers for you all. What made me think this is when Vi tells Xaden she doesn't care where he's been, she thinks in italics, awesome, just in time to practice on the gauntlet tomorrow. And he cocks his head to the side and says, "You really don't, do you?" Now, this could easily be him picking up on her body language, but the fact that it was in italics, I would be checking her intentions to see if she really cares if I were him. So I just wonder, like, is he able to continue to read them after that first scalp prickle?
Maybe he's doing a little bit of both, reading body language and intentions.
That's true. I just like to think that he's always using his powers.
Yep.
And I totally think He read her intentions about running off to the Scribe Quadrant and blames it on his shadows. So he says, quote, I know everything that goes on here. And then darkness swirls around them, so his shadows. Shadows, remember, they hear everything, see everything, conceal everything. Based on the clue we got that his intention signet is what alerted him to Violet, this really makes me question if his shadows can, really can do all of that, or if he's using it to cover for how much he knows with his intrinsic signet. Like, I figured that that was the case to some extent, but this really emphasizes that.
It definitely could be that he knew from his shadows, but I agree that I think he was definitely reading her intentions and slipped up again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it could all be chalked up to like hearing rumors, but like, where would that have circulated? Like, that should have been a moment where we as readers were like, how do you know that?
We believed it. We believed the shadow thing.
It's my bad for trusting in Xaden. But you know what? I haven't learned my lesson. And I'm okay with that. So Violet tells Xaden she's debating running away when he asks what she's doing out after curfew. And he responds that he's doing the quote unquote same. And Violet thinks sarcastic ass. But honestly, here, I bet he was thinking this. After just meeting with the Griffin Flyers and knowing that he can't help more, I mean, he says that this was hard for him later chapters to stay there knowing that he couldn't do more to help. This might actually be at the beginning of Iron Flame, I think. But that it was the best way to help them because they wouldn't have access to the daggers if he leaves, they being the revolution.
I kind of think that he was being honest with when he said same and not being sarcastic.
Which just goes to that, like, Violet's perspective on certain things, like, we really have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And I think his POV last episode shows that.
Yeah, and you said when we started this podcast, we learned how unreliable of a narrator that Violet is.
Yeah. And I knew that about a book, right? There has to be some growth somewhere, but damn.
Yeah.
Then Xaden gets all ooey gooey and says, quote, I can barely count the number of people in this quadrant who want you dead, either as revenge against your mother or because you're just really good at pissing people off, but you're still here, defying the odds. Shadows wrap around me, back to Violet, and I swear I feel a caress along the side of my wounded cheek. Quote, it's been rather surprising to watch, actually. And Xaden would know more than anyone how many people intend to kill her. And then the caress.
He's like hugging her without actually touching her. The caress along her cheek. Oh my gosh. He's comforting her when just a few months or even weeks prior, he wanted her dead.
First of all, we love romantic development. But
yes, we do.
How did Violet not, like, first of all, I would have fallen. I've already said this a million times, already fallen. But if there was any moment up to this point that I hadn't, this would be it. What do you mean? He's using his powers to caress you and you still, like, are all in down bad? Because I am, and I'm just reading the shit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know how she didn't realize that he did not want to kill her and that something was a brewing.
So far away from the truth. Now, Xaden has a little tough love moment with Violet that is super confusing to her, understandably, but it actually works. And she starts thinking outside of the box because of this tough love little pep talk. There is one part that really stood out to me about what he said here. Quote, you want to know why you're still alive because you're at the scale I currently judge myself against every night. Every day I let you live, I get to convince myself that there's still a part of me that's a decent person. These lines gave me morally gray chills. Oh my God.
Is he convincing himself of this? That's the reason he's keeping her alive?
It's got to be part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, he really does struggle back and forth, but he's still so in denial. I mean, they have to be. That's the progression of the book. They can't just like immediately fall, right? I get it. But I love those moments. Just like I'd have a whole book of all my favorite moments. And it's literally just Xaden talking.
Xaden's point of view. Xaden and Violet. Banter. The end.
Melt. Anyways, so Violet continues to contemplate running to the Scribe Quadrant before risking death on the gauntlet. And while she explains that her mother catching her is part of it, she thinks to herself that, quote, most importantly, if I go, if I hide, I'll never know if I'm good enough to make it here. And while I might not survive if I stay, I'm not sure I can live with myself if I leave. And this is the moment where I truly see Violet shift from being a scribe to a writer.
Most definitely. I totally agree with that.
Just in time for presentation. On presentation day, it starts with like a whole bunch going on. We just made it across this huge climax of the gauntlet, and then all of a sudden we're thrown right into another huge scene where cadets aren't falling off of the gauntlet, but they're being roasted by dragons. And I finally, before we get into all that is, I finally ran into something I'm unsure of its significance. When Vi and Rhi are talking about the history test that they have tomorrow, Vi mentions the Treaty of Arif. Violet says, the agreement between Navarre and Krovla. Remember that, keeps coming up. For mutually shared airspace for both dragons and griffins over a narrow strip of the Esben Mountains between Somerton and Drathus. This is clearly setting up an explanation for something, so we will keep an eye out for that because I don't know what that something is, even though I looked up keywords in here. We'll keep an eye out, and if anyone listening has an idea for where this comes into play, please let us know. It's another rabbit hole I'd love to go down. And I feel like I've been pretty easygoing on Dane this reread, but he really pissed me off before the gauntlet. He tried again to get Violet to run, and she says, I can't, any more than you could leave Kath and run to the scribes yourself. Dane responds, that's different, I'm a writer. That just shows how Dane has never seen her as a writer, never even gave her, and the idea of it, a chance, as opposed to Xaden, who is in awe of how well she's doing and thinks that she can figure it out. He doesn't even tell her how, he lets her think of that himself. Now, to be fair, Dane is definitely letting his fear of her dying lead him, and I can understand a level of that because she does matter a lot to him.
I understand to a certain extent, but also agree with Violet when she tells Dane that she has made it this far, and that's more than she can say for a fourth of her year. He just needs to give her more credit because that in itself is kind of a big deal.
Yes, and I love that Violet acknowledges that staying in the Writer's Quadrant is a choice she is making at this point, rather than something she is being forced to do. Yes, that was the case initially, but she had an out, and she chose to stay. And that timing is super important because it is absolutely what kept her from being torched by a dragon at presentation.
That's true.
Now, Violet reemphasizes this difference when Dane asks her, what changed between Parapet and now? And she responds, me. I got chills.
Big time chills.
I also love how Amber Mavis is having a fucking breakdown over Violet getting creative and making it across. Like, she's more angry about that. And Xaden is bored out of his mind recording times with his stopwatch. But it was even more satisfying that Violet read the codex word for word against Amber, who is known for following it to a T. Violet even thought, no wonder she and Dane are so close. They're both in love with the codex. And then Amber's, you're quoting the codex to me? So satisfying. Then, unlike Dane stepping in front of Violet and always stepping in first, Xaden lets Violet speak and defend herself.
Ugh, naps for Xaden. It's such a small detail, but it makes a world of difference. Because she is not a damsel in distress, and Xaden doesn't treat her as one.
Absolutely, which again is one of my favorite parts of his character, and I love how Rebecca shows that difference between Xaden and Dane. But what I wouldn't give to be in Xaden's head when Violet explains that her dagger is a part of herself per the codex, because it reads, his eyes flare and I don't miss the hint of a smirk on that infuriatingly decadent mouth. And then she uses her own words against him, saying, the right way isn't the only way. I just know that this was the first time, the very moment he first called her a brilliant fucking woman in his mind. This was it right here.
Yeah. I love how he refers to her as that. And then in her mind, she refers to him as beautiful fucking asshole.
Totally foreshadowing him eventually. I think, is it in Fourth Wing, or maybe it's only in Iron Flame where he calls her a beautiful fucking woman? But that foreshadowing comparison to what she said about him, yeah.
We love it. Amber Mavis then yells at Violet, you think like a scribe. And she definitely meant it as an insult, because writers think that they're above everyone else, including scribes, maybe especially scribes. But thinking like a scribe continuously keeps Violet alive.
Exactly. It isn't an insult, because thinking like a scribe is one of Violet's greatest strengths as a writer, and sets her up to become not only the most powerful writer of her generation, but also a much better asset, and I imagine eventually a much better leader for the revolution.
Love it.
On to presentation day. We went from one of the most intense climactic scenes on the gauntlet, all this buildup, and then straight into another with like dragons torching cadets left and right. And holy moly, I said that gauntlet gave me anxiety. Could you imagine walking in front of 100 massive dragons who average at 25 feet tall? Something I didn't notice on my first read. Yes, that's the average. So Terran's even more massive than that. Hoping not to offend them with your existence so they don't torch you?
We all know that I would not have made it this far, but if by some miracle I did, I think this is where I would die. Oh my goodness. I don't think I would have been as indecisive as prior, but I think I would have had a similar vibe and scared of everything, and that would make the dragons just torch me.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have made it past the gauntlet, but I would have walked a hell of a presentation day. Right off the bat, we are getting instructions for all of the things that these cadets have to do in order to try not to offend these dragons. And Garrick is the one giving it. And Violet mentions Garrick's patches on his uniform. Flame section leader, and 5 advertising his skill with a multitude of weapons. But she doesn't say whether he has a confidential signet patch. This was clearly intentional, yet we still do not know what Garrick's signet is. But according to Skyfall Scotland on Tumblr, Rebecca Yarros said in a Sydney panel in June that we will find out what it is in book 3, and that she loves it.
Oh.
This means we'll be looking out for any and every hint we can possibly find as we go through both books to see if we can figure out what that could be. Because I cannot wait to figure it out.
Oh, I'm so excited. I wonder if, and we'll continue looking for foreshadowing of his signet, like you said. I wonder if it's going to be more in Iron Flame, because that's where
Oh, yeah.
we learn more about Garrick.
It's just so strange to me that, like, as much time, I know we don't spend a ton of time with him, but, like, how has no one ever mentioned if he has this cool signet that she loves to write? How has nobody mentioned it so far? And she knew his signet in these books, so it must be, like, so significant that she really wanted to hold on to it until late. I don't know. I can't wait. In this stretch of chapters, we get to meet our darling Andarna. So before Violet's squad even starts walking for presentation, they're told that there is a Feathertail that has joined. Many of them scoff to the point where Garrick has to tell them to relax, that Feathertails never bond. This part actually pisses me off because the majority of these cadets would find it insulting to bond a Feathertail rather than an honor that a dragon would even find them worthy to bond at all. Especially considering she makes a total of 101 dragons willing to bond, and there are 169 cadets walking for presentation. So not all of them will even get the chance to get a dragon at all. They would be lucky for Andarna to bond her. And now that we know how unique Andarna is, they really were just so arrogant and undeserving.
So true.
But importantly, the reaction of the cadets tells us a lot about how the Feathertails are perceived. At this point, humans know very little about Feathertails. They assume that it's an adult dragon with a different tail type option, because remember, dragons get to choose their tail, and all but feather tails are weapons like dagger tail, club tail, morning star tail. You get it. So in their minds, Feathertails choose to have that tail as a weapon, which makes humans think they're weak and don't bond because they abhor violence, when in reality, they're just baby or toddler dragons that are only a few years old.
I didn't put that together about the tails. Oof.
Yeah. Rebecca Yaros, and this is not something I threw in the notes, so I'll have to find this interview, but she said that she really thought it would be interesting to have this variation where the dragons got to choose their own tail and what that says about the dragons, which is where I connected it. I don't remember catching that in the book itself, but she says this, they get to choose. So yeah, I didn't get it either about the Feathertail until I started trying to picture it. And I was like, wait, like that connects, that makes sense.
100%.
My mind is one of those like conspiracy theory boards.
Yeah.
That's what my mind is all the time. So all of that information is why these cadets are so shocked by how small Andarna is when they come across her at the end of presentation line, is they assumed that Feathertails are the same size as the other ones because no one else has seen a Feathertail in their lifetime. And this would mean Andarna is abnormally small and weak, not big enough to carry a rider. And Andarna can hear them when they say that. Like, no wonder she's so self-conscious. But Ree even says, it's full grown. There's no way the other dragons would allow a baby to bond. So Ree, being her smart self, connects this and then, brushes it off. Understandably, no human alive has ever seen a baby, she says. Boy, was that foreshadowing. Holy moly, it was right in front of our faces. This is one of those moments where we are told what to think by a character who has no idea what they're talking about. And I now trust nothing they say.
Unreliable narrators.
But then Tynan and Luca start throwing insults at Andarna, comparing her to Violet. And it makes so much sense that Andarna can't breathe fire because she hears all of this and definitely would light their asses up. Like, Tynan would have been no more if she could breathe fire. And I want to know why no other dragon torched him after hearing him say he wanted to kill her. I don't understand.
Were they mad because she is a baby and they knew she wasn't supposed to be there?
But to risk a cadet, because that's Tynan is the one that then goes after her with Jack. So it's like they torch for all other reasons. Why not just take him out just in case?
Right.
Like they don't really have like an affinity for the humans and keeping them alive to begin with. So I don't know. I don't understand. Anyways, we may never understand that.
True.
So this is the moment when I doubted my first instinct that Violet would bond Tarn, the black dragon we'd heard all this stuff about, because it felt extremely obvious that this little golden feathertail would bond her. And I love this because it made the surprise of Tarn showing up at Threshing so much better, and of Vi getting to bond both of them even more satisfying. Because then I was like, right about both.
Yeah. I was telling you in our chapters 5 through 8 episode that I did not realize that Violet would be the one to bond to Tarn on my first read until it happened. But I did think that she would be the one to bond to Andarna on my first read just because of the way they described her. It was very similar to how they described Violet. And I was like, oh, this is her dragon.
Oh, yeah. And another point on Andarna that we talked about in episode 2, our groundwork episode, is that Rebecca Yarros did not initially write the Empyrean series plot with Andarna in it. She was added because her editor wanted Vi to bond a smaller and weak dragon like herself, which we will expand on next episode during Threshing. But I think that's important here because I interpret that Andarna was written in after the first draft was complete and it went to her editor. So that would mean that Andarna would not have been at presentation?
Yeah, I think Andarna adds so much to this story. And at presentation, when everyone sees her, and Luca and Tynan are calling her a mistake and weak, and our lovely and amazing friend group sticks up for Andarna. And I think that this, along with Violet's compassion at Threshing, which we will get into next week, like you said, shows us that some dragons are not just looking for a ruthless cadet to bond.
Yeah, absolutely. So we learned that part of what the dragons use to judge the cadets is how well they get along with each other. And they can tell this by them talking to each other as they walk for presentation. This is for sure why Luca died. But how did Jack not get torched for this? Like maybe it's because he became friends with the people in his squad. But what about Tynan, who was being an arrogant ass the entire time? Why was he allowed by 101 dragons to go through Threshing to begin with?
I think Jack has made a group of friends because he's got his little minions. I have no idea how Tynan did not get torched. And we said that earlier. How did he not get torched for the comments he made? But also, he was just being horrible to everybody.
The logic that we're presented for why they get torched, and I get that, like, we also don't know the dragon's reasoning, but, like, if anyone should have qualified for that, it should have been Tynan. Like, even over Luca. Like, he should have died before Luca. I don't know.
I did think that this was a really special moment for Rhi and Vi's friendship whenever Violet notices Rhiannon's nerves and starts to talk about her family. This is one of those moments when we get to see how much Violet looks out for the people that she loves.
Absolutely.
We also learn that these first years are not allowed to write their families to encourage loyalty to the wing. Violet comments that this is a bullshit rule and how she's just as loyal to her sister whether she's had a letter from her or not. And I have to agree with her on this. Most of the time, I talk to at least one, if not both, of my sisters every single day. But there have been times where I haven't been able to talk to them as much, but we're always just as loyal to each other. And she's right. Some bonds just can never be broken.
I also noticed that comment that she made there, which I have some theories on who we might be losing eventually because of that. Some bond will never be. I won't go there. I won't go down the rabbit hole. I'm sorry. That was such a sentimental moment and I just like crashed the party. But that is why that line stood out to me this time. That I agree. It's so strange that the rationale is that it makes them more loyal to their squad and Besgaiath and Navarre itself over their family. There's got to be more to that, or there's just
I'm so interested to know your theory on that. Are you saving it for another time?
You know, I don't think it's like super in depth so much that I just see the direction of Onyx Storm losing another strong relationship in Violet's life. So I don't know. I don't want to stress you out. Well, I'm going to wait and stress you out during Iron Flame. How's that? Deal?
Good. Because Iron Flame's not stressful enough, so please add more.
I got you. I did especially enjoy the moment where Ree tells Vi that she can trust her and is slightly hurt that Vi didn't share her gauntlet plan with her. Vi explains she was just protecting her because that's just what friends do, and this parallels a large part of Iron Flame until Violet realizes that she needs to give Ree the agency to make her own choices in what to be protected from. This was a really amazing thing to watch play out in their relationship between the books, and I really hope that we get even more of their friendship in the next 3. I keep saying that, and I will never not. I love reading about their relationship.
I do too. I really would love more on that. And really looking forward to, since Violet has shared, I think, almost everything with her now, really looking forward to how their friendship grows, but how Rhiannon can help her with stuff going forward.
Absolutely. Like working as a team rather than Violet constantly hiding things from her.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to in Iron Flame. Another significant topic is brought up in Violet's efforts to make lighthearted conversation while they're walking: the fables of Wyvern. This is the first time we really get let in on what Wyvern are, how they are like dragons, but bigger, which is something I missed on my first read. I don't know if you realized that. They're bigger than dragons.
I missed it too.
What we do know, they do have 2 feet instead of 4, but I hadn't paid attention to the fact that they have a mane of razor-sharp feathers streaking down their necks, and a taste for humans, unlike dragons who think that humans are a little gamey. So Wyvern actually eat humans, whereas dragons just torch them, and I have a feeling this is going to come back to like a Wyvern eating one of our favorite characters. But I'm really trying not to go there today, guys. I'm really trying. Now, Luca's assumption that they were an elite squad of griffins shows that these cadets really think the worst thing out there are griffins. And boy, are they unprepared.
Oh, sorely unprepared.
I also found it interesting that Rhiannon's parents told her about the fables when she was young. She says that they would tell her and her twin sister that the Wyvern and their eerie-eyed venom riders would take them prisoner if they took treats they weren't allowed to have. Is this the first clue we get that venom have strange red eyes?
I think you're right. I think that this is the first time that it's mentioned.
I feel like I would have noted this in previous chapters, so I do think this is the first. Anyway, Violet explains that her dad used to read her these stories before bed every night, and this was such a great way for her dad to prepare her, repeatedly telling her stories growing up in a way that she would remember. Then we get context about people turning venom when they channel directly from the source, which Vi says her dad explained to her after she freaked out when she was little, thinking her mom had turned venom because her eyes were bloodshot red. This, to me, seems like it is not an insignificant throwaway line. This line is actually the most compelling evidence that General Sorrengail was a venom, and a lot of people have used that for their theory that she was. And what makes it even more compelling is when Luca laughs at them, saying this is some border village nonsense, which makes sense because people closer to the border are more likely to know about the venom, and that everyone knows the wards would stop any and all magic that doesn't come from dragons. So if General Sorrengail was a venom, she was under the wards and couldn't use that magic or channel that power, as the wards only began weakening in the last few years. But her eyes have just been that red one single night. My understanding is that they become more red the longer that they're venom. But maybe it's more complex than that and can also be super red if they've recently channeled a significant amount of power from the source and can go back to normal under the wards the longer they go without channeling.
I don't know. She definitely could have been venom, But I don't think that General Soaringale was Venom. I think that her eyes were probably bloodshot because of exhaustion or something like that. But I do think that these details are very important and maybe just giving us clues about what Venom actually are.
That's true. It's true. I'm gonna play with this. I don't have like a single she absolutely is a Venom or she absolutely isn't feeling. But I'm gonna play with that as we make it through the rest of this book and Iron Flame, because I do think that there's valid theories about the fact that Violet's hair is silver and somehow could have meant that that's connected to it. But we will get into that another time. Now, I really enjoyed reading the scene where the two green dragons, one of which we know goes on to bond Ree, start intimately inspecting Violet's dragon armor, smelling Tyne, Mira's dragon. And a few things crossed my mind here. This is another instance where Vi uses her mind to get out of a situation that many other cadets would not have made it out of alive, because Professor Kaori did not teach them how to disengage from dragons. But Violet remembers that greens are the most reasonable, so opts to explain her cut hands and dragon armor to them. 2, I thought it was considered rude to talk to any dragon you aren't bonded to. But maybe that's different if the dragons themselves aren't bonded, or because like the greens initiated it.
Yeah.
Kind of. Still seemed risky. And 3, I really love when we get direct interactions with the dragons. It's so fun to read.
And maybe she was able to address them directly because they approached her first and were like, they were almost like asking questions without asking questions. They were like, hey, why you smell like that?
Yeah. Well, and they're also the most reasonable. So like Reason would say they approached her. They seemed curious. She explained it to them and answered what questions they may have had. So I think that we could write it off as that. But like, it definitely stood out to me that like, you are not supposed to be able to do that. It's one of the number one big rules about dragon to human relationships. And that wraps up our discussion of the chapters themselves. So much happened. In like these 3 little chapters, but also there's such big things. Now we are heading over to the Healer's Quadrant to do our weekly temperature check on our beloved characters and some that are really just pissing us off this week. So we are going to start with who was hot for you this week, Karen.
I think it's going to be pretty rare when Xaden and Violet are not on this list for us.
Absolutely. Violet specifically has to have her moment right here. As I mentioned before, we really saw her turn into a rider in this section. She had the perfect opportunity to run off and become a scribe, like she always planned, and was even tempted by it. But ultimately, she learned that what she actually wants is to be a rider, and it's so awesome to get to see her confidence in herself grow. So props to Violet this week. I also say Xaden because I do think he pushed Violet the way she needed to be able to think outside of the box on the gauntlet. But I want to be clear that Violet is the one who thought of the idea on her own. So really it goes back to props to Violet this week.
Now, I do have someone new for this list. And that is Riddick.
Yes. Yep.
I wanted to add him because of the support that he shows his friends and his comedic timing.
Absolutely. Honestly, like the Chosen family really gets it this week as well. You've got Sawyer, Riddick, and Ree, who all really step up for Violet in various ways at different points in this stretch of chapters. And I love watching it.
Love it. So who was not hot for you this week?
Luca and Tynan, both. With the insults about Andarna, I am so glad that Luca was roasted. Should have suffered longer. I don't think, I said this earlier, I don't think she was as bad as Tynan here, but somehow he made it through presentation. So he is like the number one, absolutely not for me this week. And will remain that next week. And then he will never be on the list again because he dies.
Spoiler alert. Agree. But also Amber Mavis. I cannot stand Amber Mavis. Because so she's against Violet here. She's like, you broke the rules. And if she's very into rules, that's fine. But she's just, the way she comes at Violet, it's like she's already got something against her. She doesn't think she should be there either. And
I wonder what that could be.
Who knows?
I wonder if it has anything to do with Dane.
Probably. Anyways, I don't like her. Her and Zane deserve each other right now.
I agree, but I just felt like she would want to be somewhere on the list, and I just thought, you don't deserve it. So I didn't even add her, but she's in the knot. I agree. On to our favorite moments. Let's bring some positivity back up in here. I've got a couple.
Yes, tell me.
Violet acknowledging to herself that she wanted to become a writer.
That's
there. I've covered that. Violet defending Andarna.
Oh.
And then, of course, her core chosen family coming in behind her and doing the same. And then her bonding moments with Rhi during presentation.
Love.
I loved them every moment.
One of my favorite moments was when the green dragons approached Violet because they smelled Tyne. It reminded me of whenever I come home from petting somebody else's dog and Lady, my dog, cannot stop sniffing me.
That's actually so funny.
She's like, hey, who'd you pet? Who'd you cheat on me with?
Oh. On to our favorite quotes. I've got a couple I'm going to throw out. You think like a scribe. I know this was meant as an insult, but again, it's the opposite for Violet, who responds, I know.
Perfect response.
Similarly, Vi's sass when Dane tells her, I don't know if I can watch. And she responds, then close your eyes.
Yes.
And my third one is yours, so I'm going to let you share it.
Yes. My favorite is when Violet runs into Xaden after burning Auralie's belongings, and she asks him if she's going to kill her. And she says, I just need to know what my chances are here. And Xaden replies, that's the oddest way I've ever been hit on.
Can you tell we just really love like the sassy, snarky comments? I love them.
Love it so much.
Time to join our riot as we take flight into our overarching questions and theories section, starting with what do we think Xaden was using his powers for at moments of scalp prickling?
Now, we only counted one moment of scalp prickling in chapter 10 when Violet is coming back from burning Auralie's belongings.
Yes, and we touched on this before, but I don't think he intentionally did it knowing it was Violet or looking for something specific. I think it was him using his signet to take a survey of the people around and found her with it. Why this wasn't done with his shadows, again, I still don't know. Really, this choice on Rebecca Yaros's part makes me think that his shadow signet has more limitations than we were first led to believe. So we could cover with second signet, but I don't think he was looking for anything specific there.
Yeah, me neither.
We also look for moments when he may have used it on others, but there weren't really any significant moments where I felt like he was using it in any meaningful way on other people.
No, I agree.
Similarly, with Dane reading memories, we didn't catch any moments of Dane touching Violet's face in these chapters. We actually didn't get a ton of Dane at all, which is so nice.
Because he barely spoke to her because he was mad at her. So he didn't really touch her.
You know, that's the one thing I am grateful for. So we didn't have much Dane. Now for our theories portion, I just have one this week. We had two moments where the Malik ritual of burning the deceased items after they die were mentioned in this section of chapters. First, when Violet throws Auralie's pack in the burning pit, she refers to it as a tribute to Malik. Second, the chapter 11 epigraph, which reads, "It is a grave offense against Malik to keep the belongings of a dead loved one. They belong in the beyond with the god of death and the departed. In the absence of a proper temple, any fire will do. He who does not burn for Malik will be burned by Malik." Major Rorley's Guide to Appeasing the Gods, 2nd edition. So this is really the extent of info that is behind this ritual that Navarians have of burning all of the belongings of the dead. always referring back to it being for Malik, insinuating that there is some sort of consequence to not burning the items. What does it mean to be burned by Malik? What happens if items aren't burned? This stands out so much to me because whatever the consequences are to not burning the items has to come back into play in some manner. We know of several people who have died whose things were not burned, including Violet's dad, if the Fables book counts as his, or his Feathertail research, which is in some unknown location to anyone but Violet, seemingly, and Liam with his letters to his sister. Now, I have a theory on this, but I don't know how much I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to come up with what it would look like for this to be significant, to give you guys like where my mind is going with it. I wonder if resurrection or someone contacting the dead does end up being a thing, but you have to have one of their items to do so. Like if Vi needs to know where more of her dad's research is, or speak to one of the first 6, specifically Lyra, who wanted the ward's information to be shared, maybe there is a way to contact them if she has one of their items. I don't know. There is a theory that Violet's second signet is speaking to the dead. Think Liam during the interrogation scene in Iron Flame, but Rebecca Yarros has said that she was completely disconnected from both of her dragons, so could not channel, which debunks that. Mm-hmm. And she says that bringing people back from the dead cheapens the death of characters. So I don't fully believe that my theory here is true, but I do think that this burning items of the dead ritual for Malik will come up in some significant but similar way to this.
I kind of like your theory, but I also don't know how much I believe it. Rebecca Yarros is making sure that we know it is super wrong to not burn the belongings of a loved one. And I do think it will come up again.
Yeah, it's got to be something significant. Now, listeners, if you have any ideas on what this could be, please reach out, comment below, send us an email, or we can continue the conversation over on our Discord chat, which we have linked down in our show notes. We would love to talk more about this and any and all things Empyrean with you all.
And that wraps up chapters 10 through 12. Thanks so much for listening. And don't forget to join us next week where we will deep dive into chapters 13 through 16, plus Xaden's chapter 16 POV. Also, if you are enjoying this journey with us, we would love it so much if you would leave us a review and share this to all of your Fourth Wing friends.
As always, we encourage you to email us all of your thoughts, theories, and suggestions to dearfantasyreaderpod@gmail.com or drop them below if you're watching on YouTube. We want to hear it all.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and follow us over on TikTok and Instagram. We are currently doing a huge giveaway that ends this week on August 31st.
Until next week, dearest fantasy readers, prepare yourselves for threshing as we continue our journey through the Empyrean series.